So I got my good friend IT3 Dylan Rhorer, who is a prior infantryman in the Marines who transitioned after a full tour completion over to the Coast Guard. So he's going to be talking about his experience in boot camp from Marines versus Coast Guard since he went to both. He's also going to be talking about the work life, what it's like working in the Marines versus the Coast Guard, quality of life, and then lastly, we're going to be talking about benefits. If you want to see the full series, I'll include a playlist in the description box, and you can just put that on and listen to the whole thing. And let's just jump on into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, Military Journeyman. In this episode, I've got my good friend, IT3, Information System Technician, 3rd Class, Dylan Rhorer. He's a prior Marine that transitioned into the Coast Guard, and I got him on the show to be able to help us break down the big key differences between the Marines and the Coast Guard for those of you that are deciding which service that may be best in line with you. So, Dylan, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, so I am IT3 Rhorer, formerly known as Corporal Rhorer. Did the Marine Corps Infantry, and now I'm in cybersecurity with Coast Guard.
Very cool. So, you did, how long were you in the Marines for?
I was in for 4 years.
4 years. Now, so Dylan, I know a lot of people say that the Marine boot camp is probably the most challenging boot camp out of all the services, and then Coast Guard is surprisingly up there, being one of the most challenging as well because of other aspects. But would you mind explaining the what your experiences was like going through Marine Corps boot camp versus Coast Guard boot camp, and like what are the key differences?
Okay, so the biggest difference I can think about right off the top of my head is the length. So you got 3 months with the Marine Corps boot camp, 2 months with the Coast Guard. As far as the Coast Guard goes, as far as I understand all boot camps go, is that they do like the storming, breaking, building thing, where they essentially break you down, build you back up. Coast Guard boot camp was reflected off of the Marine Corps boot camp. So as you could tell, whenever going through Coast Guard boot camp, they would reference the Marine Corps drill manual constantly. And then that's how they would form their drill, even though it's not the same. And I had a whole lot of issues with it. So Marine Corps boot camp, it starts out with learning how to be a recruit, which all boot camps kind of start out like that. You learn how to be the recruit. You learn how to essentially conduct yourself. And then the Marine Corps boot camp goes into marksmanship training, and that lasts about like 3 weeks to maybe a month, where you go off to a different location, like you're not at the same barracks, and you conduct your marksmanship training. And then you go off and do your MCMAP, and then you do your confidence. Oh, and MCMAP is the Marine Corps martial arts program. It's kind of dumbed down during boot camp, where all you learn is how to kick and punch, which is silly in retrospect. But so you do that, and then you build your confidence. So you do the confidence course, So whenever I'm saying all this stuff, it probably sounds a bit similar to how like the Coast Guard boot camp was structured, with like how you come in, you learn how to be a recruit, you learn how to conduct yourself, and then you, instead of going to marksmanship training and MCMAP, we're doing seamanship. You do the confidence building. So you do. So the confidence course for the Coast Guard was the obstacle course for the Marine Corps. So as soon as I saw that, it was like a blast from the past. Blast from the past. Major differences. The biggest reason I saw people drop out of Marine Corps boot camp was due to injury. The biggest reason I saw people dropped out of Coast Guard boot camp was their election of duty, I guess, is how you would describe it, where they had a sock in the wrong place, so they got sent back a week, or they got reverted, or they just failed out because they just weren't confident enough in the actual recruit. Strangely enough, so you start out Coast Guard boot camp with like a lot of people. I want to say like 70. Does that sound right?
Yeah, somewhere probably the 70s, the hundreds. Yeah,
and then by the time you finish, it's like 30 to 40. So that's a pretty ginormous number of people being dropped. For Marine Corps boot camp, I think we started out with 60, and then we ended with 30. So it's like roughly this. So it's The only difference is that people don't get reverted in Marine Corps boot camp. The only reason you would get reverted is because you're injured. So you're there for 3 months, 6 months until your ankle or something gets better. Coast Guard boot camp, you get reverted, which could be anywhere between a week or 2 weeks, which is a major morale demoralizer. No, my bad. It's just a demoralizer. So I read a few articles saying that Coast Guard boot camp was the second worst after Marine Corps. Marine Corps is obviously the worst just because it's so physically intensive. And then I guess also mentally intensive because of how they like operate a little bit. And then Coast Guard is a close second because they revert you. So it's like a mind trick almost that other branches don't really have like the resources or time to do so. I guess I'm not sure. But reversion is definitely like probably one of the biggest things that get people in Coast Guard boot camp.
So with Marine Corps boot camp, they kind of tout it as being one of the most challenging boot camps for the physicality. Compared to the Coast Guard, where would you say on that?
So if there was ever another boot camp that was harder than the Marine Corps would stop what they're doing and instantly make theirs harder. Like it's where their pride is derived from. So you can never say that there is a harder boot camp because the Marine Corps is going to stop what they're doing to make theirs harder and just change everything. To be completely honest, the Coast Guard boot camp was not as physically intensive as I thought it was. So honestly, I do kind of like how they operate, where you don't really run. Like there's not really any cardio. Like you do the bike sessions, and that's essentially where 100% of the cardio comes from, minus like maybe one motivational run throughout Cape May, which was actually really nice, beautiful city. They just do the push-ups, sit-ups, and then they make you forcibly sweat, like you know what I mean, and like there's like the barracks are like designed to hold sweat or some crazy thing. Marine Corps boot camp, you're running all the time. You're constantly running. Your job revolves around running. Coast Guard, you're not really going to be running too far on a 65-foot boat. You know what I mean? So it kind of makes sense with how they operate, where it's like more of a free weight, like do push-ups and then sweat because you're going to be in an engine room. It's almost like it's catered to what the Coast Guard does, and the Marine Corps is catered to what the Marine Corps does, which is just run in open fields.
You know, one of the big things, like after you get out of boot camp and you've been talking to people that have been in the service in the Coast Guard, you find out like in Coast Guard boot camp, they're only allowed to do so much physical activities throughout a certain amount of day. Like in each activity has maybe like a certain like point system or something like that. So you're only allowed a certain amount. Like they can't just beat you all day, nonstop, all the time. Otherwise, people would, just be like over the top. Does the Marines have that type of structure, or is it just like, off the cuff?
Yes and no. So back when I went in 2012, they did have this, but they didn't follow it because there was no one around to enforce it. But now that like there was a couple incidences with the Marine Corps boot camp, they've been probably upping the security a little bit. So there was because you still have the same situation where like a chaplain or medical personnel come in and then they ask you questions. They're like, hey, how long would you guys say that you like have been IT'd for? Like the incentive training, I forget. I think that's what IT stands for, incentive training. Which is the exercise they make you do if you mess up. And they're like, how long have you been IT'd for? And it's like, I think 45 minutes. And they're like, okay. They jot it down on a piece of paper. And then magically the drill instructor disappears or the company commander disappears because they broke the rules and now they need to like be re-educated or something. You know what I mean? Like, so that stuff happens, but it didn't used to happen. As in like people didn't used to come in and like ensure that people were being taken care of. Just as long as no one's dying, I guess they're getting trained properly.
So how much more physically demanding would you say that the Marine Corps boot camp is compared to the Coast Guard boot camp?
I would say a lot more. Like every day so you have to like earn each chow. You know what I mean? Like you get 3 chows, you have to earn each one. So I would say you probably get PT'd or IT'd for like 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks. 8 weeks if you're unlucky in Coast Guard boot camp. It's the entire time up until graduation day. Like graduation day, we were doing stuff. Like we did a motivational run the day of graduation, and then the day before that, we were just exercising all day. We're getting IT all day.
In
So I
in,
mean, it
in
was
Coast
like
Guard
from the first day to the last day, essentially.
for Coast Guard boot camp
For the Marine Corps boot camp.
for Marine Corps. Okay.
So Marine Corps boot camp, you're exercising the entire time, like the entire 3 months. But it's like you almost look forward to it because then you're not doing drill, which is like takes up 50% of your time. Like 45% of the time is like exercising, and then 5% of the time is sitting in a class for a couple hours learning about very boring things. And so you look forward to exercise at that point. Like later on in Marine Corps boot camp, Coast Guard boot camp, like I would say about 6 weeks because they give you that time to like look for a house for your new unit, set up your point of contact and all that, like stuff that you need to individually worry about. And then you get what is it, 7 days of boot leave for Coast Guard? I think I took about 4. The Marine Corps gives you 2 weeks, I believe, and that's when you're supposed to figure out all your stuff. Like they give you they don't give it to you, so they take it out of your leave, but you got to use that time to figure out how you're going to move there. And you don't really get a point of contact because you're going to. So Coast Guard, you go straight off to the fleet, so you got to learn where to live in the fleet. Marine Corps boot camp, you're going straight to MCT or SOI. So that's like the A school.
Okay.
So there's only like on 2 different sides of the country. So there's Pendleton and Geiger.
So with Coast Guard boot camp, you're working out up until about the 6-week mark, and then it kind of slows down because now you're focused more on transitioning to your new job. With Marine Corps boot camp, you're doing this for, what is it? Marine Corps boot camp's 13 weeks?
I know it's 3 months. 13 weeks sounds right.
Yeah, so about 3 months, and you're working out all the way up to that point, to the very end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what about like the Marine Corps and versus the Coast Guard boot camp? They put the Coast Guard up there as being number 2, because it's apparently the most mentally demanding boot camp. Would you agree with that as well, or how does Coast Guard boot camp kind of get up there?
Yeah, so you have to memorize a lot of things. You have to memorize the plan of the day. Everyone who's on the duty roster for the Coast Guard boot camp, you have to learn that every day. What time the sun rises, what time the sun sets. That stuff was taxing. I'm not used to that. I can't remember anything. Like I could barely remember what I did yesterday. So that stuff was tough for me. General orders, you actually had to learn this. Like Marine Corps boot camp, I think back at it and I laugh because I got out of boot camp and I barely knew my rank structure. I was like, I guess I'll just figure it out. And then the general orders, like you don't get reverted in Marine Corps boot camp. So if you get it wrong, you just have to do like an extra hour of exercise or something. I got stuff wrong every day, constantly, to a point where it's like, I'll figure it out. Like I went my entire Marine Corps career without knowing 100% of my general orders, and it never affected me. And that, like, I was standing post. Like general orders are designed for standing post. And it didn't really affect me because they're all common sense. I get to the Coast Guard and it's like, oh God, I actually have to remember things. So that was because I was thinking, I was like, I don't really need to learn all this stuff. They'll just pass me on by. And then I learned about reversions and I was like, oh, Jesus. Okay. So yeah, so it's mentally because you actually have to learn and recite and memorize things.
Now, would you say that which one would you say is more stressful to be in? Would being in Marine Corps boot camp or Coast Guard boot camp be more stressful?
I guess it really depends on the person. Like if you're a bit on the heavier side, I'm guessing Marine Corps boot camp's probably going to be harder for you. If you have like the slightest bit of intellect, Marine Corps boot camp might be harder for you. Because if you can memorize things, Coast Guard boot camp should be pretty easy for you. Like if you have like the processing power for that. If you're physically fit but you can't remember anything, Coast Guard boot camp might be harder for you because you could just run through everything in the Marine Corps. Like you don't need to actually have a big brain to get through Marine Corps boot camp. You just need to be fit. And even if you're not fit, like I saw a lot of like heavy set people join the Marine Corps, and then by the time that they're leaving, they're like running 20-minute 3 miles. It's like, okay, like they'll get you in shape. It's just going to be a lot harder for you.
I think another big fear about people is the swimming. People don't really know, but like in Coast Guard boot camp, you don't do a whole lot of swimming. Do you do a lot of swimming in Marine Corps boot camp?
Do a few days. Coast Guard swimming is harder. So the Marine Corps boot camp swim qual was really easy. It's basic level swim qual, which is you dip your head underwater and shed your gear that's already halfway off. You swim 25 meters in one direction in 3-foot water. And then you tread water for, I think, like 5 minutes. It's something ridiculously easy. Coast Guard boot camp, you actually have to swim like around the circumference of the pool, which I think is like 100 meters. And then you have to tread water for 5 to 10 minutes. And there was something else, right? Or was that it?
Yeah, I think the big test is like doing a 100-meter swim, and then you have to tread water for 5 minutes. You have to jump off the board.
Ah, right. There's that too. Yeah. So Marine Corps does that too. But I would honestly say that swimming the distance is way harder than swimming 25 meters and shedding the gear that's already 50% off. So yeah,
Okay.
I would say Coast Guard boot camp has the harder swim qual, and you actually swim more. I almost want to say double the amount of time in Coast Guard
So,
than you do in the Marine Corps. You dedicate like 2 days of it in the Marine Corps.
but with the Marine Corps, how much running would you say that there is?
Every day. So the PFT for the Marine Corps is 3 miles. You're probably going to run that 3 miles at least 4 to 6 times in Marine Corps boot camp. You're probably going to be running either longer or shorter distances in between the span of that. And then there's also the combat fitness test where you have to like run with weight for time. So there's also that, which will break you off no matter how physically fit you are.
Okay.
So you have to like do the buddy carries and carry ammo cans that are like 30 pounds each.
And versus the Coast Guard running?
Coast Guard running, the only time I can really remember physically running was during the motivational run towards the end, whenever you get your guide on. And then cycling, I would consider cycling a form of cardio that's equivalent to running. You do cardio or the cycling. What is it? It's I don't really remember because every day kind of seemed like Groundhog Day for a while. I want to say it was every day.
So if you could go back and you could redo a boot camp, which one would you do?
Coast Guard because it's shorter.
And coming from a Marine that has taken the 2 most challenging boot camps, which one would you say is the most challenging?
I would say probably the Marine Corps at this point. Like I said, it does change. Like the smarter you get, Coast Guard is going to be easier. The physically fit you get, the more physically fit you get, Marine Corps boot camp is going to be easier for you. So I would say probably, well, also Marine Corps boot camp because I feel pretty confident in myself. The less confident you are, the harder time you're going to have in either boot camp.
So now I want to transition so we got boot camp out of the way. We're going to transition to your first unit. What is it like transitioning to your first unit in the Marine Corps versus the Coast Guard? Hope you guys liked this video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you're enjoying these, just smash that like button for me. Let me know that you are enjoying these conversations. If you want to see the full interview of this series, I'll include it right here. Or if you want to keep watching something else, you can watch this right here. Until next time, peace out.